Welcome to Do Your Dailies, the podcast designed to help you on your journey of addiction recovery. We're going to go through the big book of AA and use our collective experience, strength, and hope to help you understand what addiction recovery really looks like. So grab some snacks, sit back, press play, and dig deep. Thanks for being here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Do Your Dailies podcast. My name is Chris, and I am with Joe today. Joe, how are you?
Chris, I'm doing very well. We're here in Utah. It's a beautiful morning here in Utah. Unfortunately, we're missing Dave. He's out on a personal errand with his family. But I'm looking forward to jumping into the material that we've got today to share with the people that are joining us, and we look forward to sharing this message with you today.
Awesome. Good deal. Yeah, so far so good. We're in a little bit of a heat wave in Utah, which doesn't sound like a real thing, a normal thing. I'm from Phoenix originally, and you're from Texas, both places that are suffering way more than what we have here in Utah. But, you know, we get here for a few years and we start to acclimate, and we're like, man, it's hot here. And then back home, family is like, you baby, you big wuss.
Yeah, well, it's a dry heat out here, which they don't have that in Texas. They've got all that humidity, so I mean, you get in triple digits up there. I mean, and it does not feel like 100 degrees out there. It feels more like 105, 107. You know, it can get very uncomfortable. It's
tough. So I'm sure the listeners and viewers are from wherever you are. You have permission to complain about the weather, no matter what. And we won't try to one-up you, I promise. We'll all be miserable together at this span of the summer as we record. Now, when you listen to this or when you watch this, it's going to be a different week, of course. But it may be snowing right now for you. But we're here, and on that note, we did have a little chat with Dave a few moments ago before we sat down and pressed record, and Dave mentioned something that hit me, and he just referenced sobriety and recovery and how things could be different if it weren't for his recovery.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, we might go through hard things in life. We might go through trials and difficulties. We do. We do experience those stressors and those hardships. We can't avoid it. But one thing as a therapist, as a dad, as a human being, as a person, all the things that I try to do, how can I get through this a little more efficiently? How can I get through it a little more successfully and not stew in the chaos, not suffer quite so much and quite so long? And so as he talked about that, my brain started firing on all the what ifs, and sometimes we go, why is it so hard right now? Why is this happening? Like, why me? And something that gives me pause is it could be worse than that. And it doesn't minimize the circumstances that the person is going through. We're not trying to be like, suck it up, tough, any of that kind of thing. But it's just, can we balance acknowledging this is really hard right now with, I'm really grateful too for some of the things. And
you know, when he was sharing that with us, the one thing that really stood out to me was this idea that, you know, if he or any of us were back in the active stage of addiction, would we be able to show up to circumstances where people get hurt, things are difficult, things are hard? Would we show up? You know, that's kind of how he kind of presented it to us. And for me, what's really important is looking at that and really asking ourselves, you know, addiction has a lot of qualities that destroy our lives. But one of the biggest things that it destroys is our capacity to show up, not just for others, but also for ourselves. And that's the one thing that really stood out to me as Dave was talking, is like when he was bringing that whole conversation up, is the importance that I have to remind myself, you know, recovery is not just about that selfish, self-centered state that most people talk about. It's also losing aspects of self that get us and keep us connected. And that's the lovely thing about recovery that I've found today, is that staying connected and being in touch with other people is one of the most vital aspects involved in recovery, because it is part of that spiritual awakening that keeps us in the commitment to ourselves and to others. And it is what I would refer to as the lifeline that keeps us going.
My favorite movie is called Peaceful Warrior. I really don't recall if I've mentioned that on the podcast. I talk about it all the time in other areas of my life, but as we've met together, I don't know that I've brought it up. I love that film so much that I tattooed something from it onto my wrist as a reminder. My mother would say as a rebellious act, but for me as a reminder. Those 3 words are the 3 rules of life, according to that movie, according to Dan Millman's book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And the 3 words are paradox, humor, and change. And anyone who's seen that movie, Peaceful Warrior, if you do, send me a message. I want to chat about it. I geek out on and nerd out on this concept of personal reformation and change, and the evolution that we take as human beings as we discover who we are, what our values really are. But in that, he says, Dan in the movie, he lists out those 3 rules: paradox, and he says, the life is a mystery. Don't waste your time trying to figure everything out. Mm-hmm. Humor, keep a sense of humor, especially about yourself. It is a strength beyond all measure. And the last one, change. And he says, know that nothing stays the same.
Yeah.
And that third one in particular brings me comfort and stress sometimes. The comfort being this hard thing isn't permanent. It's not going to last forever. It might feel like it's going to last forever. The ugliness of chaos, suffering, health issues, emergencies, the consequences of addiction, behaviors, and so on and so forth. This too shall pass. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, rarely in my experience, does it pass by osmosis. It takes our effort and sometimes, a lot of times, the grace to change. The other side is the good things. We can't assume that they'll always be there, and so we need to cherish them while we have them. And that might include letting people know how we feel about them, not assuming that they know we love them, not assuming that they know how much we care, but expressing that and showing up. The second part of that, going back to the hard things that we endure in life, there's a situation where there's a serious physical injury for one of the characters, and Dan has many I'd say some mentors in his life, just not the main one, but one of these other mentors says to him, "I know this time is really hard for you right now. Are you paying attention to it?" And that, to me, is such a strong invitation to be present, to be in the here and the now. And as we referenced, what if I was still drinking? What if I was still using? What if I was still living in this addictive lifestyle? I might not be here. I don't have to be here. And sometimes when that stress level goes up so high, we check out, we tune out. That's one reason that we pursue substances, behaviors, things that release dopamine at a high level, things that will mask or allow us to dissociate and run away, because we don't want to feel that pain. And so in that film,
the pain and stress are things that actively are avoided at all costs. And there's nothing that's actually more effective as an agent to check us out than alcohol or drugs, because it works 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And that right there is actually part of the trap, is that it's easy, it's available. For the most part, it's legal, or it's becoming more and more legal. And that's not something that somebody in the midst of pain and suffering is ever going to look at. They're just looking for relief, but they don't understand the trap of that relief is also an addictive quality that will destroy their relationships and their own personality as they've come to know it.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, we do this life thing knowing we're going to encounter some pain, some bumps and bruises, and unfortunately, sometimes those wounds are really deep and really heavy, and even can turn into catastrophe. And so, to our listener, we're very mindful that sometimes life is so heavy, just so burdensome, and you're not alone. We can't come in and solve those issues for you, but we are on your team. We are on your side, cheering for you to navigate through it so that the consequences can be smaller and less, that you can be in a place of happiness and peace as quickly as is reasonable and realistic. But sometimes we've got to really be intentional with ripping those Band-Aids off and examining those wounds and really getting to know what that's really all about. And it's, that's tough. It's tough work. So, but this is our Big Book podcast, and we are going to jump on to page 38. For those of you reading along, following along, join us. And over to 38. More about alcoholism. And I'll start reading for us. Let me get my bookmark out of here. It says, "You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane." That just always speaks to me. I believe myself to be a pretty rational guy, but sometimes those thoughts, those ideas, those emotions are coming so far out of right field. Some people say left field. I don't know why people say left field.
Left field, right field. I don't care what field it is. The reality of it is you put alcohol in the mix, you're just not thinking straight. And when they say we have been strangely insane, it's true. If you take a look at an alcoholic and you transfer the alcoholism into jaywalking as far as like an addictive quality, this story makes complete sense, because everybody that has the rational mind would look at somebody that's jaywalking like that and say, "Hey, dude, you really need to stop it." Same thing happens with alcohol or drug addiction. It's like loved ones, support systems are saying, "Hey, man, you really need to stop it." But in the midst of pain and suffering, the only thing that we're looking at is relief. We're not hearing the words. We're not seeing the devastation that everybody else is seeing. We just want a relief from the immediacy of what's going on. And that's a perfect statement for really what happens is we go from a state of sanity into a state of insanity, but the insanity is chasing relief instead of sitting with the discomfort. We think the discomfort's going to last forever. The insanity is the relief then takes over, and then we might be in that insanity for a very long time, if not leading us to the end of our life.
Yeah, you're right. So it says, it's strong language, but isn't it true? I want those people in my world who will give me that strong language, the truth.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to hear. And so we've got to have compassion. We've got to feel a sense of compassion. And if we do, then we're more likely to hear that message, to receive that message. The line that I always attribute to you, I need you to receive the message. I need you to hear it, And so we need that, but we need a sense of compassion first. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for all the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration.
I'd like to just point out, I think at this point, there's a very important message, because in italics it says this: absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. I think anybody should take a pause when reading that and really reflect. It's like, no matter how much you know about yourself, when you're in the midst of pain and suffering, the only thing that's going on in your mind is like, I've got to get out of this. I've got to get out of this uncomfortable state. And that's why alcohol becomes such an appealing aspect involved in it. It's like, I'm not looking at my self-knowledge. I'm not looking at what this is doing to me. I'm looking for relief from the discomfort I'm experiencing. Just saying I know myself isn't going to stop the cycle of starting and then getting into a habitual pattern and then in a destructive pattern. So it's important, I think, that we invite the audience as well to please take the opportunity to understand that just because you think you know yourself, please understand that the dimension of bringing alcohol into your system and knowing yourself changes everything. And it will change you to a point where you don't even recognize yourself. And it's so subtle and so, I guess, it feels like a natural transition that the subtlety won't ever be picked up until it's too late, because you won't notice the extremes until you're in the midst of something that will create more suffering.
Makes me think of some of the workshops we've done together over the years where we talk about the problem. And when you come into an addiction treatment center, everyone's focus is on alcohol or the drug or whatever that thing is that's the problem. We understand, as we break that down and dissect it, the drug is the solution, not truly, right, but in the mind of the individual attempting to survive. It becomes the solution to escape, And so we recognize, okay, let's break it down a little further. If that's the solution, then what's the actual problem? And it's that discontentment here, the pain, trauma, depression, anxiety, family issues, abandonment, rejection, all betrayal, all of the stuff. Mm-hmm. And we go, alcohol makes me not think about that. Drugs make me not think about that. Winning big, or the risk, the adrenaline, all the things makes me not think about that. And so in our mind, we start to believe that's what makes me better. But it doesn't. It just numbs it. And then once that numbing wears off, here comes that original pain, in addition to whatever other chaos and consequence has followed, has been incurred by my actions. Right. Which then sends that stress level back up. And we wonder why relapse occurs.
Starts all over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about snowflake hitting the top of a mountain, and for whatever reason there's momentum, and it begins to turn into a snowball, into a boulder, barreling down a mountain. Just picks up speed and girth and becomes chaos. So there is hope, but we've got to, going back to that, speaking strongly, assertively, that this is what's going on and this is what I've got to deal with. Then we discover how. Over on 39, it says, Fred is partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. I don't know how common that is. Hey, it might be a little worse than you're making it out to be.
Well, nobody wants to actually ever tell the truth of the exact nature of how consistent we've been with drinking or drugging. You know, that's why in the medical profession, they really refer to us as just absolute liars because we don't tell the truth. You know, they could have all the scientific information saying, sir, these tests show this and this and this, your enzymes are up and this and this and this. Are you drinking? I don't know what you're talking about. I think you need to run those tests again. You know,
there's always a comeback. There's always a rebuttal. There's always something to push back or justification along those lines. And even here, your tests are saying this, but I've got this. I know. I've never been better. I've never been happier. I've never been. I'm motivated.
You don't understand. I'm only drinking with the boys.
And something that validates in the mind. We're not saying legitimate, authentic, true validation, sure. But in the moment where it talks about Fred being a successful businessman, to all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual. How he makes friends with everyone. He has such an attractive personality. And so some of these individuals that we look at and we view as, they're incredible. Mm-hmm. Alcoholism, addiction is one of the very few things in this world that doesn't care who you are, how you are, doesn't discriminate. It wants all. Sure. Everyone. And it will have everyone if it has its way. And so sometimes we look at those individuals that seem wonderful and incredible, and we don't realize how strong the demons are, how powerful this disease of addiction really is. We think of alcoholics and addicts, and we all get a vision. We all have a judgment that takes place, what they look like. Usually it's him, and he's he might have a beard that kind of looks like ours, maybe a little dirtier or longer or scruffily. I don't know if that's a word, scraggly, and families abandon him, not by their own problems, but because of what he's done. Sure. And we visualize somebody who's dirty, who doesn't smell great, who's unemployed, probably homeless, doesn't have a place to call home anymore, and some addicts. Some alcoholics look that way, but not most.
Well, and we're about to jump into an explanation to help us understand why, because Fred's condition is fascinating as far as like what happens next.
All right, let's see. I had my spot here. I lost it.
He made up his mind. Yep. Oh, no. The doctor intimated, and then it was like for a few days.
Yeah. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated that he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Now, we know Fred. We know this person, male, female, old, young, successful, unsuccessful, happy, otherwise, it doesn't matter. Fred is everywhere.
Fred's in denial because denial is everywhere.
Yeah. And it really hit me. He was positive that his humiliating experience, so this is the worst it's ever been. This is such a wake-up call to me. Now I know. Now I get it.
And now I'm going to stop no matter what.
Yep. Let him tell you about it. Now we're to page 40 in the middle. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time, all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. So over on now, page 41, in quotations, he says, I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all. Nothing more.
You know, all of that's in italics. Okay, so again, it's basically inviting us to say, okay, we really need to examine exactly what's going on, because what's fascinating to me is earlier he used the word reason in looking at this, and then all of a sudden he's like, okay, I had a perfect day, everything was fine, I wasn't stressed out, I didn't have any anxieties, I didn't have any fears. He goes to the hotel, and then the minute he goes and he looks into the dining room of the hotel, his mind starts to work. But it's not working in the way we want it to work. It's working against him in a very subtle, conniving way because of what's about to occur.
As Dave would say, and as the book talks about the obsession of the mind, we love our minds. Our minds are amazing things.
I trust it.
Yep. And for better or for worse, sometimes our minds deceive us. He says, I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night, and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York, and of finding a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering.
Okay, so what we have here right there in that explanation is we have how the obsession of the mind has got him to drink, and then the allergy of the body just absolutely hooks him. And it's not just one drink. It's a cocktail, and then after a cocktail, it's a highball, and then after that, he is just done. And he's just going and going and going and going and going. He has vague recollections of what happened at this time and this time, but is that not the story of an addict? Is that not a story of an alcoholic? It absolutely is. But guarantee it, he gets back in the hospital, and his mind is going to start all over again. This is just a small setback. I can get back on my feet. This is what I need to do now.
The focus is on, the shame is there, and how did this happen again? But then some of the focus starts to come into play of, but I was doing so well, and so I just got to keep doing what I was doing before, and this is just a blip. This is no big deal. Now, in terms of long-term recovery, we will acknowledge that sometimes a lapse or relapse happens. I don't believe, some will say that it's part of recovery. I don't believe that, and I don't buy that.
I've never bought into that ever.
It's a relapse or lapse is a manifestation of the addiction on the mind or on the person who is trying for recovery.
Sure.
But we need to be careful that we don't justify and thereby invite a lapse or a relapse. It's not, every person has to determine this for themselves, but I don't think it's worth the risk. So, in the middle of a lapse or relapse, here we are. Sometimes this happens. What are we going to do about it? Here's how to get back on track, so on and so forth.
Yep. So let's get back into Fred's story, because this next part is just so insightful.
As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. So we talk about complacency. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come. I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen, and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow.
So this is the reason why we have in the literature and in the discussions amongst ourselves in AA that there is no defense against the first drink. Plain and simply put. We do not have a defense against putting ourselves into a dangerous situation. We should absolutely have boundaries that absolutely avoid anything like what he just went through. And he himself is actually looking at it and analyzing it, and he's like, hey, what happened? And he himself has actually gone through and said, I had no defense against this because I wasn't properly armed. I thought I was, but it's not enough. That's where we need the whole program of AA, not just portions of it. And that's unfortunately kind of what I've seen in my years of working with addicts and alcoholics, is that they love to take components of it, but they don't want to take the whole thing because they think it's going to be too much. But it's a system that works in rough going, and it's not too much. For years I said this to addicts and alcoholics. It's like, if you look at the amount of effort that you put into your addiction, and then you look at the amount of effort that you have to put in your recovery, it's so much less complex and just not as inventory heavy. And what I mean by that is that you don't have to put so much work into recovery, but you definitely have to put so much more effort into addiction. So the idea really is that this program is simple, but it's not simple in the sense that early on you are absolutely going to struggle because you have to change. That right there is the hardest aspect involved in the stages of recovery, is that the first portion of it is just changing everything about the way that you operate, because you have to condition yourself to absorb the idea that your mind is not your friend, and it's working overtime to get you to give in, which is going to make you sick again and to keep you sick.
Yeah. And I think we're much more successful, we're much more prepared if we can accept that we don't have to do this alone.
Yeah.
It is, I believe it is too much to try to do alone.
Oh, I know it is.
And by finding those and recruiting those trusted peers, advisors, mentors, friends, whatever those things might be, we can do this. We can beat it. All right, page 42. We'll finish out this chapter. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me, I've been there, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not, intellectually, hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and, I hope, more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Sometimes I wonder, why is that? Why do we have to be so mangled to wake up, to accept?
Well, you know what? I mean, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about my own journey and watching the journey of hundreds of other men and women over the years, if not thousands. And I'm convinced of one thing. I think you have to be mangled in this disease to get to a point of complete acceptance of the condition that you're dealing with, to go to any length to make those drastic changes that he's talking about. Because without it, you're not going to have the ammunition or the backing to sustain yourself through all of the changes that are required to actually reclaim your life. I just think it's that drastic. I think you have to be beat down so hard that you're either going to step into life or you're going to die. You know, I know that might sound very drastic to those who are listening, but if you've been where we've been at, if you've seen what we've seen, you'll understand exactly what we mean by that, because it really is an all or nothing perspective. And most people don't understand when they're getting into recovery, it is about a complete transition from your old life into a new life that you don't know anything about, but you will find out.
Yeah. Those who've experienced such a darkness know exactly what you're talking about. One of my prayers is that people who haven't experienced that darkness won't have to. That they'll reflect and evaluate, where am I at right now? Am I happy? Am I at peace? Do I have serenity? And those are buzzwords. What is that? We could spend some time talking about what those even mean. But we know what those feelings are. And I would love for there to be an opportunity for people to grow and to change without having to go to those hells. Sometimes I think we have a resistance to that. We won't take it seriously. Or what is that old phrase? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Mm-hmm. Or I'll go Monday.
Yeah.
Starting Monday.
Yeah.
Starting now.
After New Year's.
Yeah.
Chris, after New Year's.
And I get it. I understand the resolutions and the commitments and the promises and all of those kinds of things, but there's a high risk there. There's a high mortality rate.
So as we're getting ready to finish the rest of this portion, I want to just add that when we've been told about this plan of action, please understand that this plan of action is not just changing the way you think. It's changing the way that you behave. And it's also incorporating spiritual strategies, and it's gonna end on a very important spiritual truth that must be understood if we're going to get anybody into recovery. So, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you on that, and then we'll end it in hopefully talking about really what is a plan of action and what exactly is the spiritual component that's tied into that.
All right, back to page 43. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men, whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you, if I had been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power.
Okay, so I would encourage everybody to absolutely underline that last sentence. Because the plan of action isn't just changing the way that we think, it's changing the things that we do, but it's also incorporating an understanding that there must be a spiritual component that absolutely must be tied into that plan of action for our lives to transform from an addictive state into a recovered state. And it can't be done any other way. That's the one thing that I think is turning a lot of people off on AA is they're turning to medications and all these other things. They're not realizing that the path of true freedom from addiction comes from you redoing life and reconnecting to a spiritual source that is in you, because it is a part of you. When you evade that, it is part of the pain that you carry, because we're not doing the work to heal ourselves. We're not doing the work to recenter and ground ourselves. We're avoiding it and continue to do it, and therefore the addiction grows. So I absolutely agree with everything that's been said, specifically in these last few pages on more about alcoholism, because it's true. You have to have a plan of action. You have to be able to be fully informed and understand exactly what are the necessary steps that must be taken to get out of this thing called addiction, with the threefold nature of like the allergy of the body, the obsession of the mind, and the spirituality. And if you're not fully informed of that, if you don't know the disease you're fighting, if you don't know exactly what you're coming up against, you're not going to be informed on what you need to do to get out of it. And unfortunately, that's why people stay in addiction so long, is they're never given the information because they've never been told. Not only is it in here, but you need to use this as a textbook to remind yourself. And this is where it gets challenging. You must renew the reminders to yourself of what must be done to maintain your life, your recovery, and your spirituality, and your assistance to others to make it all work. That's the plan of action. If that isn't done, unfortunately, what I've seen is I've seen people go back out that have had substantial time, that understand the principles, but then forget the principles because they don't remind themselves of it, because they don't go back to the textbook. They don't do service work. And these are, these might mean and sound mundane to some people, but it's not. It's like we are social creatures that must also incorporate a social component into our addiction. The addiction kills us socially. It gets us to a point to where we've isolated from every other helpful hand that's there for us. I mean, literally, I turned away people that were saying, "What can we do for you? We want to help," and I'm just like, "I'm good, thanks." We, in recovery, we get very well accustomed to opening our mind to when those statements are said to us, paying attention, taking steps to saying, "Oh, please, I'll let you help me," but also being very keenly aware that we do the same when we see others in very similar states. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, something that just keeps echoing in my mind is there's hope, and sometimes when we read, it's intense. There's a lot of like consequence. There's a lot of like complex like difficulty, and it can feel stressful to some. And again, we don't have to do it alone, but there are steps that we believe are required to get into this thing of recovery. And also, a moment ago, you said recovered. And sometimes in our world, people say, well, once an addict, always an addict, or once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. No, there is hope, but we have to do the dailies. We have to do those things along the way to keep us healthy.
I agree with that, and I just want to add something to that. I think for a lot of people that go to AA, they hear people constantly saying, "Hi, I'm Joe, I'm an alcoholic." They rarely hear, "Hi, I'm Joe, I'm a recovered alcoholic." I don't want you to take offense to hearing that people are still referring themselves to alcoholics, but I think you need to be very careful. That still puts you in a label. The thing of it is if you read this book correctly, it clearly says we go from an addicted state into a recovered state, okay? And I want to emphasize that. You can get out from underneath the label of being an addict and alcoholic. You still have those tendencies if you don't do the work, because it's hardwired into us. The idea more often than not is that I use both. And I use both as not only a reminder to myself, but also to symbolically say, I've been on the journey of this recovered state, but it's not something that I pin on myself and say once and done. You don't do steps 1 through 12 and say, okay, I'm done. Okay. You are constantly, vigilantly making that a part of your life, going on the journey to always make sure that these principles are a part of your life, and that's the recovered state. The minute you stop doing that, the minute your mind will start working again, because it's always working, to get you to think that you can take a break, to get you to think that it's okay to maybe kick back and relax. Relaxing is what we did when we were addicted. We need to be vigilantly active to really make sure we stay in that recovered state.
Yeah, so there are membership dues, if you will. There are things we've got to do to keep it going in that direction. And as we've talked about many times, doesn't matter how healthy we are, doesn't matter how far removed from bad decisions and choices and addiction and powerlessness and all of those things. Even when somebody is operating at the optimal level, when a stressor comes into this life, it's game time. Yeah. It's decision-making time. And this is built up around so many small decisions that have a huge impact on the rest of the life. Mm-hmm. And so if we get bad news, how do we handle it? How do we deal with it? Yeah, it's hard. But we got to show up and utilize the resources around us, which might be therapists and counselors, peers, sponsors, friends, family members, a higher power, literature, things that help us, our mentors, and those tools. But when we isolate and go, nope, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to burden anyone else with my struggles and my stressors and the pain or the loss or grief or whatever's going on. We're inviting in those problems.
So with what you just said, there's one cure for what you just said, and that's accepting and embracing this statement: I need help. And you've got to be willing to take whatever's shown up and what's ever offered when you ask. And that's where the ego check really comes into play, is because the ego has such a critical part to say, oh, don't say that. Don't burden anybody else. It's like, no, sometimes I need to burden other people, and when other people come to me and they have a burden, I'm more than happy to lighten that burden. I don't want to ever miss an opportunity to lighten somebody's burdens because of the work that's been done for me from others who've shown up when I've said, I need help.
Yeah. I love that you said that. And so with that, to the listener, to the viewer, and to you, Joe, I need help, and you need help, and we're in this together.
We all need help.
Let's do this thing. That community, that connection is one of the greatest healing avenues. And so let's connect. Let's do this together. And remember on an ongoing basis that we're not alone. We don't have to be alone, even when we want to repel and pull back. We've got to lean into that. And I don't mean we need to overwhelm ourselves, especially those of us who might be introverted more. We need those breaks, but we need that human connection.
Yeah.
We need that community and that belonging. So, Joe, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
It's a pleasure as always. To you, friends, we love you. We're cheering you on. We're here for you. Don't give up. We believe in you. There is a path out of the darkness, and some of you are not necessarily the one we're talking to, but it's your loved one. It's your partner. It's your friend. It's your child. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. And we know it's hard, but you're not alone. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Do Your Dailies podcast.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Do Your Dailies Big Book podcast. If you like what you hear and you want more, please like and subscribe and share this show with your friends, with your clients, with your sponsees. That's the best way to support us bringing you more recovery content.